Grace and peace, beloved of God. Apostle Cheryl Richardson here with Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. We're excited that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to hang out with us on today and to help us to raise awareness regarding the global pandemic that we know as domestic violence. Today's topic is going to be the barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. The barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. Now, what we're going to do is give you a couple of seconds. If you've not subscribed already, please help us to meet our goal. We want to raise awareness and get the message out to as many people as possible. So you haven't done so already, click that subscribe button down there and make sure you tap the bell for notifications. And that way you can schedule the frequency of your being notified about our new videos. We upload a new video every Sunday evening, okay? And so we're going to give you a couple of seconds to do that, and we'll be right back. And we're back. So today's topic is going to be the barriers of leaving an abusive relationship. So many times people wonder when they become aware of an abusive relationship, well, why doesn't he or she just leave? I would never tolerate someone treating me that way. I would never tolerate someone speaking down to me that way or putting their hands on me. And so it's so much more complicated than that. Okay, and so one of the reasons that we are doing this particular topic is to raise awareness and to prayerfully and hopefully increase understanding about the barriers, the many barriers that a victim faces when they even desire to leave an abusive relationship. Okay, so on the one hand, they may not even realize that they're being abused for a variety of reasons. And then secondly, we're going to talk about 7 or 8 different barriers. And this is not an exhaustive list. These things that we're going to talk about on today can morph into different variations of a similar thing. But we want to raise awareness regarding 8 things that pose a problem, that pose a challenge, that may seem insurmountable to a victim. And of the 8 points, point number 1 is having nowhere to go. Literally having nowhere to go. Now, this may be because of the isolation that often accompanies an abusive relationship. This may be because the abuser has threatened or behaved in a horrific manner around family members and friends, making it clear that they weren't welcome, making it clear that they were angry or enraged or resentful. And this can cause relationships to fracture. This can cause relationships to fracture. And so the victim, whether they are male or female, may literally have no place else to go. They may not have a relative's home that they can go to. They may not have a friend's home that they can go to. They may not meet the qualifications for a shelter. They may not have the financial wherewithal to start over on their own. And so from a practical standpoint, if you have nowhere to go, where then are you going? So barrier number 2 to leaving an abusive relationship would be danger or fear. And this is rooted in what the victim has already experienced and what they have determined the abuser is really capable of. Oftentimes there are verbal threats, there's physical intimidation, even if it hasn't risen to the level of physical aggression. Maybe there are veiled threats, or maybe there are very overt threats. If you leave, I'm going to do this. If you leave, I'm going to harm your family. If you leave, I'm going to harm the children. So oftentimes, victims are concerned for their safety, and they're concerned about the safety of their children as well. And so there's this concern that consumed you in the midst of the situation regarding how your children are being impacted. Are you able to get away safely? And then there's this question, what if you try to get away and it doesn't work? What if you try to get away and they find you? Keep in mind that unless the victim, whether male or female, has deluded themselves regarding what the abuser is capable of, they know very well the dangers connected to trying to leave, especially if their attempt to leave is discovered by the abuser. So, barrier number two would be fear or danger that is rooted in reality. So, barrier number three would be the emotional investment. Throughout the course of an abusive relationship, no matter how short or how long it is, the abuser has most likely exploited the emotional investment that the victim has made in the relationship. And so, one example would be that the victim may say, well, I love my husband, I love my wife, I love my boyfriend, I love my partner, but I don't love the abuse. I love them, but I don't love the way that they treat me. So that's one obstacle. Another obstacle would be that their belief that the abuse is somehow their fault. Now, this is part of the coercive control tactics that abusers use in order to cause the victim to feel responsible for how they are being treated. That if they would do something differently, if they were a better husband or a better wife, if they were a better girlfriend or a better boyfriend or a better parent or a better friend, then they would not be getting this treatment that the abuser has convinced them that they deserve. Okay. And so, what happens when the victim embraces this belief that it's somehow their fault, then that makes them responsible, right, for fixing the problem. Okay. So, and then moving on, there's this incessant hope for change. It's like hope springs eternal, no matter how horribly the victim is being treated. And this again is part of the coercive control tactics that the abuser has employed throughout the life of the relationship to ensnare the victim emotionally and to exploit their emotional investment. And then another aspect to consider is this, the embarrassment and the shame that accompanies someone, especially if they're considered to be an accomplished individual, right? There's this thought process that, I'm embarrassed, I'm smarter than this. How did I not see this in the beginning? They're treating me horribly. Why can't I leave? If I've left before, why can't I stay away? And so the emotional investment is exploited because the victim feels that they love the abuser, although they don't love the way they're being treated. They believe that the abuse is somehow their fault as a result of the coercive control tactics that have been employed by the abuser. They have this hope for change because they really don't want to believe that they've invested in someone who could care less about them. And then there's the embarrassment and the shame that accompanies realizing that you're being treated horribly, and yet for some reason you're tolerating it. Okay, so that addresses the emotional investment aspect. Barrier number four is isolation. Now, the isolation can be from a practical standpoint just because of the lack of transportation. Maybe there's only one vehicle that the abuser shares with the victim. Maybe it's even the victim's vehicle and the abuser has commandeered it, taken control of it, manages the keys, monitors the odometer, and things like that. The isolation could take the form of the victim being cut off from anyone who may be a support to them and an encouragement to them in terms of their own mental health and their own emotional health. Now, the thing about isolation is this: it is a very common underpinning in domestic violence relationships, okay? And the isolation can take the form of the abuser blatantly demanding that the victim stop affiliating with family, friends, even parents, siblings, best friends. Anyone who's going to undergird the victim is a threat to the abuser and their control of that victim. Okay, so the isolation can come from the abuser blatantly demanding that people not come by, or making them feel incredibly unwelcome and uncomfortable when they do visit or when they do call, interfering with their visits, asking them to leave, being rude and obnoxious while they're there. Um, Anything that they can do to convince the support system that they would be better off by not interfering, by not coming by not having conversations or interactions with the victim. Now, here's the tricky part. Because of coercive control and because of the fact that the victim is very much aware of what the abuser is capable of, they may in fact discourage, they may pick fights, they may become withdrawn and isolated from their own support system. And so in this case, the abuser has pretty much turned the victim into their own flying monkey. They have weaponized the victim against themselves. And the victim is now discouraging interaction from family members. Family members who reach out, friends who reach out, who offer advice, who offer support or express concern may be met with a cool, distant response from the victim. They may be met with an angry response from the victim. And remember now, when we talked about one of the second barrier to leaving an abusive relationship is fear and danger, right? And so, in many instances, the abuser has threatened friends or family if they continue to come around. This may be verbalized to the friends and family and support system directly, or it may be instilled in the mind of the victim so that the victim becomes the reason that inquiries are rejected. So, isolation is a key component in every domestic violence riddled relationship. Let's look at barrier number 5. Barrier number 5 is economics. The victim may be unemployed, um, or the victim may be subjected to financial abuse, which is often the case. One example would be that the victim is only allowed to work part time. This deprives the victim of benefits in most cases. And so there's no health insurance and things like that um, when they're working part time. The number of hours that they are permitted to work is limited. So this really handicaps the victim in terms of being able to experience some autonomy and to be able to support themselves financially should they leave the relationship. The other thing is this: did you know that if a woman makes 65% of the household income, she is in increased danger of experiencing domestic violence and abuse? And so, even if she is the primary breadwinner, even if they're both employed and she makes 65%, she still may become the victim of financial abuse and domestic violence. Again, because someone with an abusive temperament, an abusive mindset wants to retain control, right? And so they would have to inflict you with abuse of various forms in order to do that, in order to subdue you, if in fact you are the primary breadwinner. All right. The other thing is they may not be employed at all, and you may be working at a job that pays minimum wage. You still may be the victim of domestic violence because, again, they need to exercise power and control over the victim. And this is something that many people don't really understand. Another aspect of the economics that can be present in an abusive relationship is that the abuser may have utterly destroyed the victim's credit by making excessive purchases, by spending money and not paying back the debt as agreed, by encouraging them to use their credit cards to renovate the house, use their credit cards to make vehicle repairs, to purchase things for the family. And so they get the credit cards maxed out, and then they wield control over the finances so that the bills don't get paid, um, thereby destroying the victim's credit, which would make it very difficult for them to find housing on their own. So, economics, the financial piece, is an incredible barrier. Even when a victim has decided from an emotional standpoint that they are ready to leave an abusive relationship. Barrier number 6 is pets. If the victim, if the family has pets or fur babies, as some refer to them, um, and they are unable to house them in the location that they have identified, will receive them if they leave the abuser. If they're going to a family member's home and they can't take their pets, if they've been accepted at a shelter, but they cannot take their pets, then this is a barrier because pets are oftentimes an extension of the family. Um, and especially if children are involved, then they are very connected to their pets, okay? And so the other thing is this, that it's not unusual for an abuser to threaten, to abuse um, the family pet in a play for control and power, as we've talked about before. And so it's not an unreasonable thought to believe that if the pets are left behind, that the abuser will harm or even kill the family pet. Let's look at barrier number 7. Barrier number 7 are religious values. Um, Oftentimes, across denominational lines, the meaning of suffering, the role of forgiveness, the role of submission in a relationship, and the covenant of marriage are horribly misappropriated, horribly exploited to the extent where they only benefit the abuser. And they result in a tacit agreement, a silence about domestic violence. And so within the religious community, again, across racial and denominational lines, domestic violence is more prevalent in those settings than outside of religious households. Okay. And so that is an appalling thought. It's appalling. Many of our religions have operated in a very patriarchal sense in which the woman is supposed to submit, and where she is expected to tolerate and to put up with whatever behavior, whatever abuse, torture, even that the abuser feels free to impose upon her and their children if children are involved. Okay. And so that coupled with the shame of divorce, sadly, a lot of times the emphasis is placed on keeping the family unit intact, no matter how diseased, no matter how unsafe it is. And it's imperative that we grow to a place, that we raise awareness to a place where ministry gifts and ministry leaders, pastors, apostles, bishops, teachers, evangelists, etc., understand that safety must be the first priority. Safety and not simply saving face. Okay, and so victims are confronted with the shame of divorce. They are confronted with the possibility of excommunication, being completely renounced and kicked out of their denomination because they are divorced. Um, They are subjected to, whole congregations are subjected to gaslighting and misappropriation of scripture. And then it's further complicated by oftentimes those in ministry leader positions not really being qualified as clinicians or therapists or counselors to even address domestic violence in an appropriate manner. If the ego gets involved, they will not refer outside of their denomination. They will not refer to a secular clinician, okay? And the root of that, this is just my opinion, the root of that is their need for power and control, okay? And so the entire system is set against a legitimate victim, okay? And oftentimes they are encouraged not to talk about what has been occurring in their household. They've been encouraged to cover the faults, to cover the sin. And again, scripture is misappropriated. The Holy Writ in various denominations are misappropriated to ensure the silence and the submission of the victim. And so, barrier number 7 is religious values. Now, what makes this incredibly difficult is that our own core values are often rooted in the religious values in which we were raised or which we have embraced and found comfort and solace in as adults. So our religious values can cause us to stay in a situation that is unhealthy and could even lead to death. Barrier number 8. Barrier number 8 is societal pressure, or pressure from society at large and how we experience society. There are flying monkeys. And a flying monkey, you know, that phrase comes from The Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch had these flying monkeys that did her bidding. They did whatever she told them to do. And so when we're talking about domestic violence, the flying monkey is the person who is working on behalf of the abuser, either knowingly or unknowingly. They may very well know what the abuser's MO is, their modus operandi, or they may really just feel that they're being helpful and they are somehow defending the abuser. They are encouraging the victim to give them another chance. They are encouraging them not to leave and to honor their vows and to honor their covenant and to keep their word, no matter how the victim is being treated. Now, a flying monkey can be a family member. A flying monkey can be your pastor or ministry leader. A flying monkey can be your therapist or your clinician. Anyone who is urging you to remain in an unsafe environment. Anyone who is blaming you for the fracture of your relationship is a flying monkey. Your very own children can be converted to flying monkeys. Oftentimes when relationships split, you'll have children choose between one parent and the other parent, okay? And so a flying monkey can be absolutely anybody. The best way to identify them is by what are they encouraging you to do? Is their primary concern your emotional and physical and financial safety, your psychological safety? Or is their primary concern that the family unit remain together no matter what? Okay, if that's their focus, they're a flying monkey, no matter what their previous relationship to you has been. And again, it can be that this is unwittingly, it's unknowingly, they don't realize that they're being manipulated. Okay, another thing that a flying monkey will do is bring messages from the abuser, will speak on the abuser's behalf, encourage you to be more understanding. They may ask you things like, well, what is your role in this? Okay. And so when we're talking about society, we're talking about flying monkeys, which can come from any area of our lives. Sometimes it's really hurtful to learn who they are. People that you've had lifelong relationships with, maybe someone who has been your best friend, Certainly, people who are friends with both of you may be a flying monkey. Okay. Church plays a role. We talked about barrier number 7 and how our religious values can impact us when we're in an abusive situation. There's the blame and there's the discouragement that we often get from our houses of worship in terms of ending a relationship. Okay. You may be asked, what is your role in this? Well, why did they respond that way? Well, why did they punch you in the face? Well, why did they curse you out? Maybe they had a bad day at work. What did you say to provoke them? You should know by now what not to say and what not to do. And so, anyone who is making it the victim's responsibility that they're being abused or they're being mistreated is a flying monkey. I said what I said, I'm not taking it back. Okay. A history of having long marriages in the family. Maybe your parents have been married for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and you don't want to mess up the momentum and the flow in the family. Maybe your grandparents and your great grandparents have stayed together for a very long time. Understand this. The fact that people stayed together could be that it was an amazing relationship with mutual respect and care and concern, or it could be that they succumb to the shame and embarrassment of a divorce. The fact that people stay together doesn't mean that they were happy together. It doesn't mean that it was a healthy, prosperous relationship together. Okay. And so you can't just look at longevity alone. And it's amazing when people can stay together in a relationship and it's healthy and both parties are growing and no one feels unsafe, no one feels psychologically abused, no one feels financially abused, emotionally abused, sexually abused. But is that really the case? So, again, the goal should not simply be longevity. Okay. But if you have a history of long marriages in your family, that is a tremendous obstacle to overcome if you, your fact, find yourself in an unsafe relationship. Okay. Here's another thing. Maybe the support system, maybe the family, maybe even the ministry leaders were against the relationship from the very beginning, and you decided that you were going to do it anyway because this was the love of your life. This was your soulmate. They would never do anything to harm you. And they were against it from the very beginning. They sensed that something was off from the very beginning, but you didn't listen. Okay. And so now you may feel compelled to stay in it to save face. Now you may feel compelled to stay in it because you gave your word. Okay. So we have been talking about 8 barriers, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but many of the things that you think of will fit into one of these categories of the barriers to an abuse victim exiting an abusive relationship. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. Today we've talked about the barriers to a victim leaving an abusive relationship. Barrier number 1 was literally having nowhere to go. Barrier number 2 was danger and fear as a result of what has been experienced within the relationship. Barrier number 3 is the emotional investment that the victim has made into the relationship and into their partner who is abusive. Barrier number 4 was isolation. We talked about the fact that the isolation can be initiated overtly by the abuser, or gaslighting techniques can be used that will cause the victim to initiate the isolation from a healthy support system. Barrier number 5 was economics or finances. Barrier number 6 was family pets and concern regarding being able to house them moving forward, and the dangers of leaving them in an environment with the abuser. Barrier number 7 was religious values and our core values together and how that can cause us to remain in an unsafe environment and may even lead to death. And then barrier number 8 was societal pressure, wanting to avoid blame, being embarrassed and ashamed of having a fractured relationship. And so we are grateful that you've taken the time and you've spent your time with us on today. It is our prayer, it is our hope that you have heard something that either refreshed your memory, regarding what you knew about domestic violence, or perhaps even introduced a new concept that you had not considered. We encourage you to check down in the description box for our activities, the things that we're engaged in to help to raise awareness. We would love it if you would subscribe and schedule notifications so that you can join us. We'll be in the live chat on every Sunday evening, and that will give you an opportunity for me to interact with you and for you to ask your questions and to comment and to interact with others who are watching live. Feel free to visit this YouTube channel anytime, share any video on all of your social media platforms, and we would greatly appreciate that as well. This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson. I am the CEO of Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. Thank you for spending this time with us on today, and we'll see you next week. Blessings to you.